We've had an ongoing debate in the past couple of years, kicked off by Tyler Cowen's Great Stagnation, as to how much gas is left in the innovation tank. That is, how many more great transformational ideas for improving the human condition are there really? Tyler had argued that we had run rather low in the pipeline over the past 40 years, explaining the productivity slowdown of late. Robert Gordon at Northwestern has argued more provocatively that we've run out more or less for good, that nothing will ever compare to the cluster of innovations that hit the world in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that therefore the modern era of growth that we've experienced over the past 250 years is drawing to a close. I don't believe that. You don't have to believe that either to be pessimistic about the next 10 years. All you have to believe is that productivity growth isn't going to be at the highest levels we've seen over the past 100 years, and it would have to be at those levels to compensate for all the bad news we have in the other growth components. Now, again, it could be that the 10-year boom in productivity growth we saw was just a throat clearing, and now we're in a pause before a huge surge in growth facilitated by the ongoing progress of Moore's Law. There are very smart people who argue precisely that. MIT professor Eric Brynjolfsson has the metaphor of the second half of the chessboard. You recall the legend of the Chinese ruler who asked a wise man for advice and said, "I'll give it to you for a price. Name your price. I want 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, 2 grains on the second, 4 on the third, etc." The king said, "What a steal, I'll do that." When he got to about halfway through the chessboard, he realized that he was in trouble and that this price tag was going to bankrupt him. So he did the only thing that a ruler could do. He executed his advisor. Again, when you double something every 2 years, and we double the number of transistors on a chip every 2 years, according to Moore's Law, then continued iterations of that become gigantic in absolute value. So it could be that the gigantic increases in processing capacity and speed that we see over the next decade may induce qualitative changes in the way we live. So it's possible, but right now there are no signs in the statistics that is in the offing, and the best estimates of productivity growth over the next 10 to 20 years are sort of more or less an average of the past 20, so some good, some bad, but not at those levels from mid-century that would be needed to keep growth on the traditional 2% path. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. The silver lining of this cloud, I think, is on the policy side. It's a conjecture, no more than that, but there seems to be a trade-off between conditions for growth on the one hand and conditions for good economic policy making on the other. That is, when external conditions are extremely favorable to growth, policymakers can do quite a bad job and they can produce pretty lousy policies, and still, because the conditions are so favorable, growth rates will still look good. So China has grown 7, 8, 9, 10% a year for years and years now, with a system of policies and institutions far inferior to our own. The reason it is able to grow so much is because its conditions for growth are much more favorable. It is a much more backward economy. It has much more capacity for catch-up growth. It may well be that the deterioration in external conditions for growth now in the United States will tighten constraints on policymakers. That the kinds of anti-growth policies that we have maintained for decades now and have shrugged our shoulders about doing anything about because they're so politically entrenched, things may look very different politically after years and years of substandard growth. When economic performance deteriorates, electorates get edgy and upset. They start looking for opposition parties to try to run things for a while. Plan Bs get suggested in alternative to the status quo. Sometimes those Plan Bs could be worse, but the general pattern of global political economy over the past generation or so has been a steady move towards more pro-market, more pro-growth policies, and generally that has been driven by poor economic performance motivating policy changes.